So the next thing we're going to do here is we are going to set up the bottom bracket and the cranks on the bicycle. Our bottom bracket that we're using today is actually an older system. It's not super old, but it's not ultra contemporary either. This is a square taper bottom bracket. Our cranks will fit onto these tapers here, hence the name square taper. Now, it's of note that this is English threaded, meaning what we know of bottom brackets, the drive side threads of these are reverse threaded. But I want to inspect them, and if I can see them going up and to my left side, I know that they are reverse threaded. So the non-drive side of this is going to be standard threaded. So we need to keep that in mind. This is where we are going to mount our system. Now, the first thing that we want to do, of course, is grease. So I'm going to grease the threads of the bottom bracket shell on the frame on both sides. And I'm going to give it a pretty liberal amount of grease on each side. And keep in mind that this is a sealed cartridge system, so there's actually no grease going inside the bottom bracket. It's already set up in there. I'm going to take the plastic cup, which is the non-drive side cup, and I'm going to thread it into the bottom bracket shell here several turns just to get things started. And there we've got it started nice and easy. All right, so on the opposite side now, we're going to thread in the main cartridge. And this side is threading in lefty-tighty. So I want to make sure that I'm turning to the left as I insert this. And I forgot to talk about this tool. This is a special stop socket tool that is splined to match the splines on the inside of our cartridge here. We're going to get it to go in as far as we can by hand first, and then we're going to be using a large adjustable crescent wrench to crank it in the rest of the way. Lefty-tighty. And I'm kind of holding the tool in place. It's not the best interface in the world, but I'm just pushing on it, giving it some pressure, and then tightening down as tight as I can get it to go using this large adjustable crescent wrench. We're going to do the same thing on the opposite side here, but this one we're turning righty-tighty. Again, once it is in all the way, I don't want to crank down on it too hard because it is plastic. Like I said, it can break. If it breaks, it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely not going to be doing us any favors if it's broken. So we're just going to thread it in until it bottoms out on the outside of the bottom bracket shell there. And now our cartridge is spinning nice and smooth, and we can now attach our cranks. The cranks that I'm using are these kind of fancy mountain bike cranks from the 1990s with a modern narrow wide wolf tooth chainring on it. So we're going to go one by on this, meaning no front derailleur. So if you look at the teeth on this chainring, you can see that they're contoured, and this is going to grip the chain a little bit better. This is a really contemporary modern component matched to some 1990s aluminum magic right here. I spray painted the bolts to match the bike, rainbow. These are standard chainring bolts, and I've already mounted the chainring, so I'm not really going to show you how this works, but the chainring can be removed using these bolts. If we wanted to change our gear ratio, or if our chainring wore out, we'd be able to replace it. In this case, we're going one chainring, there's single speed chainring bolts, and we're good to go. Now, this is square taper. So this square is just going to fit over the square of the bottom bracket, and then we are going to bolt it into place using some crank mounting bolts. So here we go. Our crank mounting bolts look like this. They are a metric 8 with an 8mm socket wrench, or Allen wrench, pardon me. We're going to use the Allen wrench to bolt that into place in the center. We want to make sure to grease the threads of the chainring bolt or the inside of the bottom bracket spindle. And I'm going to put a very, very slight amount of grease on the outside of the taper. Now, different mechanics will tell you different things about that. Some mechanics say no grease on the outside of the taper. Some mechanics say grease always. I always feel like a tiny bit of leftover grease on the outside of this taper is going to ultimately end up allowing our cranks to bolt on a little bit tighter, and then maybe just prevent a little bit of creaking down the road. So we're going to mount the cranks into place. The first side, it doesn't matter where it goes. I can mount it like this, I can mount it like this, I can mount it like this. It's only when we get to the second side that it actually makes a difference. So I'm going to mount this in place and mount our bolt. I'm going to use my 8mm Allen wrench to tighten this into place, and we want to watch the chainring clearance on the frame here. This frame is designed for really wide tires, so I'm a little concerned that this isn't quite gonna make it, but we look like we have plenty of room for that chainring. If anything, we probably could have gone with a slightly shorter bottom bracket taper to bring the chain line inward just a little bit, but you know, why play with fire when you don't have to? This is good. So we've got a nice decent gap here of maybe 3 or 4 millimeters between our chainring bolts and our frame. No chance of that running into place. We're going to grab our second crank arm. Second crank arm has no chainring on it. We're all set and ready to go. We're just going to match it up and bolt it into place using our crank mounting bolt. This is the guy, and this is where we're going to leave off for the day. So I'm going to bolt this guy into place. Again, I've already greased my taper and my threads, but it is important to note here that we want for our crank arm to go to the opposite direction as this crank arm. So we're not going to mount it that way, we're not going to mount it that way, we're going to mount it that way, because last thing we want is to go kangaroo bike style where both crank arms are moving at the same place, or worse yet, have it be offset to where one crank arm is moving in a strange kind of parallel to the other. We want them to be perfectly opposite each other so that they can spin freely in a regular pedaling motion. Grease the bolt just a little bit. I've already greased the inside of the threads there, so it's kind of superfluous. And this looks great. Again, things you can worry about sometimes are your cranks hitting your frame, especially if the frame kind of cants outward here. These cranks are looking really good. They're not hitting the frame. They're going on nice and tight. And I'm just gonna crank that guy on pretty much as tight as I can get it to go. So I'm pulling up on the crank arm here while pushing down on my wrench. And there we have it. And here we can see our cranks as mounted. We look at our clearances. Clearance on the chain rings is super good right here. Clearance on the arms is really good. And the clearance on the other arm is fantastic. So I'm really happy about the way that these are working out. I like the look of them, and I think they're going to be a lot of fun on this bike.